Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Ari Lax, and this week I'm going to be playing with a deck that Ivan de Castro Sanchez finished in the top 8 of Grand Prix with this last weekend over in Britain. It is a bit of a hybrid between a deck that I hate and a deck that I really like right now. So the deck that I like is Knightfall. So that's a Collected Company driven deck. Collected Company is a really powerful card, and you are not actively combo oriented in the same way like Counters Company is. Your combo piece that you do have a combo, but your combo is with Knight of the Reliquary, which is actually just a good magic card. It just is a good creature that people play normally. And the Knight of the Reliquary plus Retreat to Core Helm is usually lethal. So the way that works, combo's been around about a year and a half, but hasn't. It's one opens in the hand of Ely Cassis, but it's not consistently a player. So the way it works is that you'll notice every single land in this deck is, or as many as can be, are plains and forests. All the fetchable ones are that. You've got fetch lands. And we'll get to the remaining lands in a second, but you get to use Knight of the Reliquary's ability to sack a forest or plains, and then find another land and put it onto the battlefield. Doing that triggers the landfall ability of Retreat to Core Helm, which lets you untap a creature you control or tap a creature they control. So you untap your Knight. So, great. You get to put all of your forest and plains. You get to go tap Knight, get one, put it into play, untap Knight, tap, you've executed a loop. Great. They all go to your graveyard. Knight is huge. It's even bigger than that because you can get a fetch land, and then use the fetch land to get your land. Notably, the fetch land coming in triggers this an extra time. You get one for the fetch land and then one when you fetch. So not only do you get to untap Knight, you get to tap an opposing blocker. So it's usually just lethal through blockers. And then even beyond that, what if they have, a Slippery Bogle or something on defense? Well, every time you do this, you can float a mana off of your forest or your land. One of those being a red off a Stomping Ground. And then you get Kessig Wolfern eventually, and then give your Knight trample. That also plays around. I guess you can play around flash creatures by leaving out fetch lands at the end, but that's a little. There's just more things you can do. You can also you can get Ghost Quarter. So if I fetch up, sack my first one, get a Cavern. Sack my second one, get a Ghost Quarter. I can then Ghost Quarter my Cavern, get a basic, and then continue with the loop. So there's just little tricks to maximize the number of lands that end up in your graveyard. You can sack Canopy to draw a card, that kind of stuff. So that's the half I like. The half I don't really like is the Humans half. So the Humans half was something that I criticized last week for just being bad against like Death Shadow or whatever. And the problem was that if your best creatures died, you ended up in a spot where you would draw cards like, I don't know, Sin Collector and Thalia, and then your opponent would just play Gurmag Angler, and you'd just be like, oh, great, my cards just all suck. And then they'd cantrip a bit and play Death Shadow that's a 6/6, and then you eventually just die to their creatures because they're better, as long as they can provide answers to your best stuff. Well, the thing about this list that I really like is that a lot of that kind of not great creature has been trimmed. So you'll notice there's no Thalia Heretical Cathar, there's less Thalia Guardian of Thraben, there's no Sin Collector, which is a fine card, but it's the way the games go, it's often easy for the Death Shadow player to deploy all of their cards that Sin Collector would hit before you really get into a spot where you want to be Sin Collecting, or where like taking the turn to Sin Collect is just not worth it. There's less Mayor of Averbrook. The card doesn't really do anything or a lot on its own, and you really just have the Humans element of the things that get out of control, big enough to actually fight the opposing creatures. Reflector Mage is perfectly fine. That card wins the heads up against Gurmag Angler pretty darn well. Eternal Witness does the same thing when looping Collected Companies or pass. And then, yes, you have a bunch of Mana Dorks, but all the Collected Company decks do. If I was playing Knightfall, I'd have 6-ish, so this isn't that much more. So, main deck's pretty straightforward. Pretty traditional Collected Company deck. You'll see Company. I guess you have a few extra spells because of the Core Helms, but that's a lot to do with like trimming lands because of your curve and stuff, but really, you just get this core 8 spells. You get to play Collected Company, and then you can play Court of Calling, Eldritch Evolution. Really, I think now the thing you have to do is you have to play Path to Exile, and that's also why these other combo decks are a lot worse, is because without Path in your deck, you just don't have the interaction to really survive. Whereas Knightfall, you get to play Path. You wouldn't want Court if you could play it anyways, and you get to play this pretty nice grindy game. The only card I'm kind of wondering about not being in the main deck in any capacity is Tireless Tracker. Might want to try one or two of those in the future, but I think the big loss relative to Nightfall is actually Spell Queller, which is just an absurd Magic card with Collected Company. Moving to the sideboard, there's a lot of just 2-ofs, a pretty spread sideboard. One thing I like is the emphasis on like real solid hate bears in Canonist as opposed to Thalia. The Death Shadow deck is just going to have so much removal and sweepers post board that I don't really want to rely on Thalia. This is a pretty sweet split against Affinity with Vithian Renegades as your human shatter effect, kind of like Rexage would be in the Elf deck. It's accompanyable, which is pretty sweet, and then you have a couple Stony Silences, just a mix. Staticaster also is just insane in that matchup. I really like having this emphasis on Izzet Staticaster in the sideboard. That card is just consistently a wrecking ball in Modern. Especially as people start moving back towards Young Pyromancers and Dark Confidants to combat this influx of green-white decks. A couple negates, I think you're a little short on that, but I think that this deck was relying on the fact that there'd be more Storm than other decks like that, or Scapeshift that you can kind of race. You got some Forest Tenders to handle sweepers out of the red decks, and then Blessed Alliance as a answer. It's kind of a bit of everything. It handles hexproof, it handles burn, it kind of in theory handles Death Shadow, but I'm not a big fan of going down that road. I might bring in one against that matchup and sideboard out my retreats. Worth noting also, retreat is kind of nice because I was complaining about, you know, oh, I've got all these small crabby creatures I have to get through. Well, retreat kind of is another way to do that. So this does maximize non-reliquaried retreats more than the other Nightfall decks, which is probably why you have both of these main instead of like one main, one board, which is the traditional way to do it. So yeah, I'm excited to see where this goes. Sideboarding, I think, might be a little tricky, but we'll get to that as we go. I'm trying to think if there's anything specific. I kind of wonder how I'm supposed to sideboard for like green-white mirrors. I don't think this deck is very well set up against like Devoted Druid combo, but that just might be a thing that you have to accept, that, you know, everyone playing the more unfair Counters Company deck is just going to lose to like Death Shadow or Eldrazi Tron, and you actually have a little bit more stable game against those decks.